Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of Back on Track Trackside.
Hey, everybody, I'm Brian.
Hello, everybody. This is Joe G.
Hey, I'm Shannon.
Hi, I'm Ron.
Hey, this is Steve.
Oh, and we can't forget about Marcel.
Oh, hey. Okay, good morning, everyone, again. As I said, this is episode 25. On the panel today, we've got Ali, we've got Claude, and we've got Steve, as well as myself again this week.
Hey.
So, yeah, everyone say good morning. Just looking through the chat, we've got Brian in chat, we've got Grandpa Rails in chat, New Ferris Railroad, John's in chat as well. Who else is in there?
Marcel.
Marcel, Shane's Trains, Dave BNSF, Melvin Fackler,
John.
I'm just going through the chat quickly. Path Valley Railroad. There's a few people in there, so good morning to all. If there's anyone that I have missed, I apologise, but I'm sure we'll see your name pop up through the chat. And apart from that, did anyone want to introduce what today's topic is?
I thought that was your job,
Steve.
No, you go ahead. I came up with the idea. You get to introduce it. Prototype and freelance. We've been talking about it for the last hour. You guys should have been here.
Well, you just introduced it, Steve. So
Yeah.
Prototype or freelance. Yeah.
Yep, there you go. So today we are talking about prototype versus freelance. Like everyone always asks the question, is your layout prototypical? Is your layout freelance? Is it a bit of both? What is the difference? What are people's opinions on it? Because everyone has their own opinion on what they like and what they don't like. That's why, you get a lot of talk about people talking about rivet counters, because they like everything to be prototypical to the point, to the smallest detail. So apart from that, if one of you guys want to take it away, whilst I just quickly duck out and check on my son, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got prototype and you've got freelance, and I think a lot of us fall in the middle of that category because you're not a rivet counter, and a lot of people, and that's cool. They want to have it absolutely what they remember and prototypical, but then you've got somebody that wants to take it to the other end that you're totally freelance and you're going to make your layout however you want it. And then you've got people that in the middle, and Claude falls in the middle because it's not absolutely prototypical, but man, you're trying to follow the prototype. And so you fall more in the middle, but on the absolute prototype end of it. You're not freelance. But
yeah.
I don't think we're live.
Yeah, we are. Refresh, Ellie.
it's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, now we are.
I'm seeing it on the screen.
You sure?
Yeah, we
I
are.
want to make sure.
Yeah, now we are live.
No, we've been out here talking for the last hour about this. It's too bad you guys weren't in here for that chat because we're trying to recreate what we were talking about.
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things we need to start with is everybody is pretty much running off the basis of the prototypes, regardless of what line they like. If they're mixing their train companies on their line, whatever they're doing, they're still running the basics. Basis for all of us is the real life railroads and what they did and what they looked like. If there wasn't that basis, we wouldn't be doing this. We'd have a circle on a plywood board and call it good. Mm-hmm. But we want to make it look more like real life. And so in that regard, we're all doing some kind of prototype, whether it's strict company prototype of a railroad or just the appearance of that. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter then of what you like in that category, okay, or in that spectrum. And there's a wide spectrum. Some guys don't want to do anything that looks like real life railroad, and that's great. I mean, what comes to mind to me is the Lego layouts at train shows. They're fascinating to look at, but they're nowhere near prototype.
Right.
There's no way they can be. But they have fun doing what they're doing, and that's great, and that's where it falls. But I think all of us have prototype in there, and all of us have some freelance in there,
right?
Because we can't stretch it. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Steve?
we had a train show last year. You know, we do this every year in Oregon, and you're talking about the Lego, and that's true. But they had one of the locomotives was a Santa Fe, the war bonnet, Lego locomotive. So they're even there. They're trying to somewhat model a prototype, even though the Lego is so to the other side of not prototype.
And Claude makes a very good point about it comes down to, again, it's your railroad or railway and what you want to model and how far you're willing to take it. I mean, and it also comes down to what part of it that you actually enjoy. Do you enjoy the running of it, or do you enjoy the modeling of something that you've seen out in real life? For example, for me, it's doing a lot of the research, looking at the prototype, because obviously my prototype is not around anymore. I mean, it's been privatized and there's been so many different companies take over and things have changed since then. So I go back to things like the Bible in many cases, I look at photos, prototypical photos, some of that is, for me personally, some of the fun parts.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
Prototype.
I agree there. Like I've got a tub of books here behind me. They cover a lot of...
Shannon's talking, but he's muted, so I don't know if he's talking to us or not. Yeah, I think you're right. And like I'm doing narrow gauge mainly. And I like the wooden trestles that say like the Rio Grande Southern had and stuff. But I wanted to do bigger, grander type of things with my layout as far as what it looks visually. I just like that. So I'm not doing any particular prototype of a trestle. Now I'm trying to build it somewhat in a prototypical fashion, but it's not actually out there in the real world, or wasn't ever out in the real world. And so that's why I'm following kind of a prototype, but then again, I'm not. The individual things that I'm doing with the trains and the buildings and stuff like that, I try to keep into a prototype. But the scenes themselves, I don't care if they're prototype. If they look like they could be prototype, then I'm good with it. I'm building it strictly for me. And if somebody comes up and doesn't like it, that's their problem, not mine. It's in my house, so they can't see it from their house. Exactly. They don't have to watch the videos and that sort of thing. So in that regard, it's great. But yeah, we all have something in prototype that we're doing, whether it's the trains themselves or the buildings themselves or a whole scene or a whole layout.
Yeah, I think a lot of people try to recapture memories that they had, chasing trains and on their layouts. So it may be kind of close to what they, what they remember, but they're going to bend the rules too because you got space and
yeah, exactly. And to touch on what Ali was saying before in regards to research, I was trying to say before that I've got a ton of books here on American railroads, and I could spend hours just going through everything, just reading up on all the railroads I'm modeling, but there's no way I'm going to have the space to ever model it exactly to how I'd like to do it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, in saying that, like just to name off a few names, you got Roy Smith from Panama. He's doing the Union Pacific division, and there's a lot of aspects of his railroad he's trying to create prototypically. You've also got Dave Ballmer, who does HON 30 with the Rio Grande Southern, and same thing again. Me, Claude, and Steve and Ali were talking about it before. And basically, there's a lot of sections of his railroad which are prototypical to, almost the exact thing, you know. Like, I've watched a few of his videos where he'd be like, this is bridge number 4 on the rail line, you know, this is how it looks, this is bridge number 16, this is bridge number 22, this is the engine shed, you know, this engine shed here, they didn't rebuild these 2 lines because of a fire or something, you know. And like, a lot of models are like that, you know, like they'll pick a scene, you know, they'll model it. Even if you want to pick on, say, Rod Stewart, you know, he's got a magnificent New York Central layout of the station, you know. He's one of the biggest, you know, celebrities out there, so to speak. And, you know, you look at his layout, it's not like a massive layout. All it is basically, you know, Central Station, New York Central's roundhouse, and that's about it, really. You know, you've got a bit of a cityscape and the roads and that, and, you know, the trains then disappear, I'm guessing, into some sort of staging yard, you know. Like, I haven't seen photos of what else is on his layout, but from the photos I've seen, that's all I can really picture of. And, you know, and you can consider that as prototypical, you know, because there's a lot to see, and it's almost, you know, trying to compare that to the photo from a model to the real thing. It's like, which one's which?
Yeah, exactly. And even in his case, he's got the prototype down around the station and the roundhouse, but as you said, when his trains go off layout, okay, they went out of the country or across the state line or something like that, but on his layout they go into a staging yard. Nothing prototypical about that. You know, so if you wanted to get really technical, he's not pure prototypical, and that's why it's very hard to be very perfect in how you do everything, because we just don't have the room for it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you want to be,
it's someplace you got to compress.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you know, in our hobby, you know, when people do say, "Oh, this is prototypical," you know, what a lot of people got to understand is with doing prototype layouts and using prototype locomotives, prototype rolling stock, etc. It's basically, you know, you are not going prototype to the whole entire railroad. You're prototyping down to the point of what you want to prototype, in the sense of, you know, I want to prototype Grand Central Station, I want to prototype Union Pacific's roundhouse, I want to prototype, you know, Cayenne, I want to prototype, I don't know, I want to prototype a harbour, an airport, you know, it all that's what the prototype coming down to. Whereas on the other hand, then you got freelancing, you know, and, you know, one great example of freelancing is Steve right there with his layout behind him, you know, like that you'd consider as a freelance layout.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
based on a prototype, but I bend the rules all the time. So yeah, I would have to say mine is almost all freelance, because it's not based on anything, you know.
But you run prototypical trains.
Well, I try to run long ones. I guess that's kind of my problem is you know, based on what I've got, what can I push the limits to run on it? So that's, you know, that's a sickness that I have. But yeah, it's not based on anything, not at all. But
oh, go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I've seen layouts that are based on certain areas. Like, I mean, 2 come to mind, and one is Cajon Pass. A lot of modelers have tried to model that and have got it perfect. The Caddy Y in Northern California on the UP. I've seen some magnificent duplications of that. I've been there, I've seen it. And I've seen some stuff I've seen pictures. It's like, dang, that almost looks like it was there. Same way with the loop at Tehachapi, you know, over that. So it depends on how much room people have. I think there's a whole club that's based on Tehachapi. Everything is just absolutely prototypical to, you know, the real scene. I wish I had a link to it because it's just incredible. It looks, I mean, they've got every culvert, every bridge, every tunnel, and it looks very real.
And then you have
you go, no, you go first, and then I'll go.
Well, then you have the guys that have a story for their layout. Okay, so this gives them a reason for doing what they're doing. I haven't actually formally put down a story, but because I'm doing standard gauge interchanging with the narrow gauge, my story is kind of, okay, the narrow gauge was going to be demolished, right? Didn't have, like they did the Rio Grande Southern, it didn't have the income coming in, so they're going to demolish it. Well, my story is sort of runs on the premise of somebody came in and bought that to keep it running. Okay, now they're running tourist trains on it. They're also trying to make revenue off the railroad other than tourists. And then I still have the standard gauge coming through the interchange because that's where their main line is. And so that gives me the premise of my layout. Without that, mine would not be anywhere close to prototype as far as what I'm actually doing. But I like it. It gave me what I wanted out of it, which was some dual track stuff that was down where people could see it. And then for that, I had to have the standard gauge trains, which aren't a big part of the layout. They go to 2 reversing loops and come back through, and that's it. The main part of the layout is the narrow gauge. But I wanted more than just the narrow gauge.
I mean, you know,
yeah,
dual gauge. I mean, that is a part of history that just, you know, really, you know, should be shared because
and there's not a lot of that track left. No. In Colorado, I know Antonito still has a little bit of it, and I'm sure there's some other places that have a little bit of that. But Antonito is one of the few places they still run the narrow gauge there, where it's anywhere close to a standard gauge line. Mm-hmm. But they don't have very much of it left. But it is interesting track work, and I kind of like that. So that's why I wanted to put both in there. Mm-hmm. Plus, I got to run some of the early diesels. I picked late 40s, very early 50s. So I can run the early diesels, which I liked. I grew up as a kid seeing. And then I get to run the steam, which I have since fallen in love with. So I get to do both of those. But to do that, I had to be freelance.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Anyway, I'm just looking through the chat, and I have noticed a couple of people were saying some things. Where was I? I did say it before. Oh crap! Now I've lost it. That'd be bloody right. Here we go. So Dave BNF's N scale was saying you can make it look prototypical, but that is as close as we can ever get to it. John from Schuylkill River Valley was saying everything we do is an illusion.
That perspective.
Yep. New Ferris Railroad was saying he wanted to mimic the downtown area of Elmhurst, Illinois, as he remembers it as a kid with the trains. PDRR Engineering, my lad is based on a natural rail line, but modelled it as it might have been in another time. What else? You know, like a lot of people, you know, from what I can see, you know, understand, you know, the challenges, you know, of trying to make something prototypical as well as, you know, trying to freelance and compress. And, you know, and PDR even agrees with what you were saying, Claude. My story is about the same as Claude's, only without the narrow gauge. Steve 87th PSAP, I am starting a real short line, and I'm going to have the areas I want to represent and what I have the room for, you know, and that's the thing. It's the same with everyone who is in this hobby, you know. We all, you know, want to make a great model, you know, of what we love. But at the same time, you know, you know, sometimes it comes down to some people want to do switching. Some people want to just see trains run around. Some people want a bit of both, you know, and depending on those aspects, you know, it can also depend how you're going to build it, how you're going to model it, and how you're going to recreate it. Now, Ali, I see you wanted to show something to everyone, so I'll let you take the reins for the minute.
Yeah, I just thought I'd bring this up. The gentleman standing in the middle there, he's the owner, or was the owner of this layout. He's recently sold it, but he built this layout based on a real place. This is a place in Western Australia, in the north of Western Australia, on the original private railway, the Midland Railway of Western Australia. The place is called Watheroo. The station building's still there. The shed in the foreground there with the loco out the front is still there. The silos up there in the background, they're no longer there anymore. But this whole layout, whilst it is very prototypical, like the trees are in the right place, some of the trees aren't there anymore if you go and look at the real thing, but it is also condensed. So also you can see in the foreground there's a what appears to be a Y, where the shed sort of sits in the middle of a triangle there. He's obviously, for space reasons, had to cut the top end of the triangle off, so he couldn't quite fit the triangle in there. But again, that comes down to what space he had available. And as you can see, he's already brought the layout wider to accommodate the shed, but just not wide enough to fit in the triangle. So here's a better shot of the station building and some of the prototypical rolling stock of the era. This is 1960s, so just after the MRWA bought their first diesel locomotives, but we're still running their steam locomotives, and a few years prior to the WAGR buying out the Midland Railway. And here's a picture of the shed. Last time I was up there, which was at Christmas time, they had a truck parked in there because the tracks were all gone. But of course the building was still there. The water tower and the coal tower you see to the right there, behind that tree, unfortunately they're gone. But most of the other stuff around it is still there. There's some more rolling stock there and a loading ramp. The loading ramp, I don't remember it being there. I think that's gone now as well. And of course the silos have been moved out of town. They've made bigger ones, so of course these ones got torn down. And there's one of the F-class diesel locomotives that replaced the steam locomotives. And a little B-class steam locomotive. You can even see there as part of the coal tower, they've used Z-scale track so they can represent the little carts that they use to put the coal up into the coal tower. So all the little things like that are prototypical, but as you can see in the overall shot, the whole station area is obviously a lot longer than that in scale, but to fit within the space he had provided, he's obviously had to shrink it down. And where you see the blue boards at the end, the blank blue boards, that's where the track curves away round the back to your hidden fiddle yard. So interesting bit of prototype there, that prototype modelling fitted into available space provided.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing, you know, personally in my
Shannon,
experience.
you muted yourself again.
Oh, shit. Anyway,
I could.
I've created a bad habit for myself. No, I was saying, you know, like that's one thing I found personally with you and I, Ali, us being here in Australia, is during the exhibitions that I go to, a lot of the stuff I see is very prototypical. Even, you know, people who modelled their own railroads, you know, at home, their layouts are very prototypical as well, you know. And then, you know, I see some of the other guys who model the, you know, American railroads or some other overseas railroads, and they're very freelance about it. You know, like there are a fair few that do model prototypical, but I found, you know, like a lot of people are modeling freelance in other country prototypes, just for the fact of, you know, space and, you know, whatnot, and as well as the same thing, you know, available information, you know, like for us here in Australia, it's quite easy for us, you know, to drive down to the street or, you know, call up a friend who lives nearby and say, hey, can you take a few photos? You know, and it'd probably be the same over in America. You know, they'll see a lot of prototypical models of American layouts, but then any other layout that represents any other countries, it'd probably be the other way around. You know, they see a lot of freelance of that country instead of, you know, prototypical.
And one of the other really awesome resources, you just made me think of it, Shannon, that I have at my disposal is I can call up people who were there at the time and have thousands of photos. And one guy that I know was an actual driver of the locomotives that I've modelled here, like the photo that I showed earlier. So I can send him a message on Messenger and ask him questions, and he's more than happy to explain it to me, you know, for someone who's never worked in the rail industry, and I can get a little bit more information and run my trains a little bit more prototypically, or model them a little bit more prototypically, thanks to that resource that I've got access to.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in saying that it is getting halfway to the show, so I do have a video to run for the intermission that I did think of whilst we were talking before the show started, which I'll run. And, you know, so in saying that, enjoy the video as such. To give you a bit of a backstory, this guy did recreate something prototypical almost to the dot. I'll explain a little bit about it afterwards. I have met this guy in person before, and I think myself, as well as a couple of other modelers that are local to me, so to speak, have kind of convinced him to come back out onto the exhibition circuit. So enjoy the video, guys. Grab a coffee if you will, or whatever. Otherwise, yeah, enjoy the video. And we're back. And we're back.
What an amazing layout.
How do you do this? I do that again.
Yeah. Now,
That
just
was cool.
Now, just a bit of backstory. That layout was built by Paul Blake. He lives about 2 hours away from me, up near the area where that rail line was. That is T-scale, which is, you can buy it as 1:480 scale, but he modeled it at 1:500. In regards to the building of that layout, he went to Google Maps, actually grabbed photos from Google Maps, printed them out so they would be 1:500 scale, and then modeled the layout from there. And he's got 1 scaled kilometer, which is about 3/4 of a mile, exactly prototyped to how it was back in 1981. And to give you an idea how prototype that layout is, every time we went to an exhibition and showed it to the locals and whatnot who actually visited these exhibitions, he'd sometimes get people who used to work at the railway station or work on the rail line or whatever else, and they'd say things like I remember talking to him and he was saying, there was an old guy that approached him and goes to him, "Oh, you need to put a push bike in next to the wall on the station right there." And Paul, and he just turns around and goes, "Why is that?" And goes, "Back in 1980 when I used to work at the station, that's where I used to put my bike every day when I went into work every morning." And that's just an aspect of how what a length some people will go to do to make things as prototypical as possible. But it just shows you the scale. That's 1:500 scale, and the amount of room that takes, is also another great example as to why no one realistically can ever model something 100% prototype in the length of track and whatnot.
Yeah, but I was watching that and I'm thinking, man, that scenery is fantastic, and that's really where he's in the prototype. But then I look down at the rail, and I would venture to guess that the rail height he's using is probably 2 foot high in real life if you scaled it up.
Yeah, exactly.
But because that's practical for that small a scale, you have to have the bigger rail, or you can't run the trains on it. It makes it really tough. The smaller the rail and the smaller the wheel flanges and all that kind of stuff, you get down to 1:500. There's nothing left there to hold it on.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you've got to compromise someplace. Even if you're a pure rivet counter, you still, that's why the guys that really, really like to get down to the really nitty gritty on prototype and making it everything perfect are the guys that are running the fine scale, which is more of a F scale or a O scale size, I think. But they run on prototypical height rail. They use the right number of spikes in the plates on the rail, all that stuff, and they had to scale up and go bigger because all of that stuff is so small. Right. But at some point, I bet you could find something on theirs that's not prototypical, not real life. Something they had to compromise on. Sure. But it's a, like I say, that's why I say it's a spectrum prototype, and what you model in a prototype is a spectrum. And we're all in that spectrum someplace. It's just a matter of what end of that scale you are, or are you in the middle? It still all comes down to what do you want? What do you want out of what you're doing? It's your time you're spending. It's your money you're spending on it. Right. And you're the one that's going to enjoy it the most, so you might as well make it to you, unless what you enjoy out of it is making it for everybody else, and then that's good too.
Yeah, exactly. It was like something I did see in the chat somewhere. Grandpa Rails was saying something about I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was, from what I remember, it was something like deciding what kind of compression or something along those lines. Grandpa Rails, if you can remind me in the chat, please, so then that way I can let everyone else know who hasn't actually read it just yet. But I think everyone kind of gets the idea what I'm just trying to think now. Man, that's bugging me. That is starting to bug me. Hopefully Grandpa Rails comes through and reminds me what I'm trying to think of. Now,
Well, Art says you can go to the 1.5 inch scale like Steve's got out in his garage out there, and you have your tolerances a lot less.
Well, but even that's not prototype. I mean, if you want to pull that out, we were talking about that. We've got guys that build beautiful steam locomotives. I mean, they're absolutely prototype. You could look at that thing right down to they're just to the nth. And then online, you don't have a cut lever, you don't have, air hose.
Well, you're sitting on top of the train.
You're sitting on top of the train. That's not a prototype.
Only in India do they sit on top of the train.
That's true. Yeah.
But they're not driving it from up there.
yeah.
No, they're not.
Yeah. In saying that, Grab Barrels has come through. It was selective compression.
Yeah.
Leslie Gilpin said something about that too. He said he struggles with that.
Yeah. But like in our hobby, that is pretty much a must. If you're going to do something prototypical, yes, we're talking about credits.
Right.
You're going to have some selective compression,
Well, I mean, seriously, really, even if you go pull down to the Rivet Counters, they're not prototype. I mean, they're not going to get everything. They're going to get most of it, but it's not going to be absolutely 100% prototype. So, I mean, how far do you want to raise the bar?
Exactly, and that's the thing. Everyone has their own opinion. Everyone has their own position on how much they want to set that bar, to achieve what they want. No one's ever going to put the bar too high where they can't achieve what they want to accomplish.
And then there's
what they're able to accomplish.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like my bar's gonna be a lot different from yours, Claude, and Steve's gonna be a lot different from Ali's. Everyone's different, and that's the great thing about this model. But at the same time, like sometimes there is the argument: what is better? Is it better to be prototypical? Is it better to be freelance? Is it better to be both? Like there's all these questions that especially new models always ask: what is better? And so far in the last 40 minutes, from my understanding, there is no right or wrong, and that's what I love about this hobby.
Yeah,
it's an interesting argument that has come up here in Australia, particularly with ready-to-run models. One of the manufacturers, who shall remain nameless for their protection, has come under fire because they put too much detail on their models. Now, what constitutes as too much detail? Well, people are complaining that things like grills and a couple of lever bars and things like that and sand hoses are breaking off or getting caught on scenery and things like that around their layouts. Well, the fact that they can't even get them around a 15-inch radius, which to me is ridiculous, but some people complain that they can't get their locos around a 15-inch radius. And in real life, a loco would never go around 15-inch radiuses. Like, that's ridiculous. But how much is too much? I mean, they're going for, let's get this as prototypical as possible. And you've got the people out there saying, I'm breaking bits off left, right, and centre.
Right.
Then they shouldn't be buying those locos.
or buying.
I mean, that's the answer to that.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that's the answer to that. If you've got something that is way more than what you want on your layout, then don't go that way. It's just like the guys that buy an Athearn model, say, a blue box model, and then buy all the detail parts to put on it. That's the way they want to go. But don't complain that Athearn didn't put enough detail on it. You knew that going in, So I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but it's to me, it's like, if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. I mean,
that's common sense. In America, you've got 2 or 3 different manufacturers that manufacture the same locomotive. In Australia, we have one.
Yeah.
We have several different manufacturers, but none of them double up, except for maybe Ozcision, because Ozcision seems to be doubling up on everything. but it's easier with some of the manufacturers in America, like, you've got Scale Trains, Atherd, Atlas, Walthers, all doing, they all do SD70s. You can pick and choose what level of detail you want. Can't really do that here in Australia.
But then you would also have the group, if they did a minimum of detail on it, you'd have the group that would say, why don't you put some detail on it? So you're not going to please everybody at the same time. So each modeler, in my opinion, has to decide what they want to do and how they want to do it. It's what it comes down to. Do you want to build it for you, or do you want to build it for somebody else, or do you want somebody to build it for you exactly like you want it every time? That's not going to happen either.
Right.
So, that's kind of why this is such a wide subject to talk about, because there's the whole range in that spectrum of what people like and what they want.
100% agree with you there, Claude. 100% agree. If you don't like it, don't buy it. In saying that, if the detail's too much, then remove it. I know one guy that trims the stand hoses off.
Sure. Why
Because
not?
he keeps them on point.
Yeah. I've had to detail, or not detail, I've had to change some of the stuff on a couple of my Blackstone locos because the front coupler, the hose, what would be the hose for that magnetic coupler, hits some of the turnouts. So I have to bend them up, That's a minor thing, but it's still something I have to do. Now, I could complain to Blackstone, but that's not going to do any good either. Just go ahead and fix it, But that's kind of a different subject too. But I think everybody changes stuff when they get it to suit what they're doing, whether it's within the prototype of your railroad, or the story of your railroad, or just the way you like it to look. For me, I'm using prototypical equipment on my railroad, but the layout itself is completely freelance. I am not modeling any particular area of the narrow gauge or standard gauge for that matter. I am taking vague reference from, say, Durango and Alamosa and places like that in Colorado that did have what I've got there, but I am free to put whatever I want, wherever I want, and detail it to my desire. Like they say, every model is not finished. You just quit working on it. There's so much detail you could put in something, but where do you stop? At some place you got to stop and just enjoy it.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I was going to say as well, like what you were saying, Claude, with the locomotives, some people, they might, just like yourself, might have freelance layouts, but when it comes down to the locomotives, the rolling stock, you name it, they'll go through the distance. They'll do the hard yards to make those models look prototypical. Like I've done a couple of kit bashing, which I'm still going, to get them to look as the model I wanted to look like. Obviously I'm a bit restricted with parts, but there have been people where they'll, like I've got a friend of mine, he'll completely strip a loco down to the chassis, do cast resin molds, redo the chassis, everything, you name it, and then make a prototypical model that you physically can't buy from the shops. And like you look at his collection and you just kind of go like, where can I get that? You can't, you have to make it. What about that one? You can't buy it, you have to make it. All his models is pretty much, you got to make it, you got to make it, you got to make it, you got to build it, you got to do this, you got to do that, and it's just like, wow. And that's what some people love doing. They just love building, rolling stock locomotives, you name it, coming down to the layout, it's a completely different story. There's a perfect example right there with Ali,
Exactly. S-scale is one of the biggest examples of that. For example, these bogies, they're not prototypically 100% accurate. They're about 1.5 of a millimeter shorter than what they should be in scale. But it's so close and the difference is so tiny, you can't see it. you'd never tell that the bogies on this are incorrect. So at the end of the day, when you see it running running up and down the track, see if you can see the bogies a bit better there. Yeah, there we go. They've got new frames on them, but the wheels are a little bit smaller, and the length or the distance between the wheels is a little bit shorter than the prototype. But again, you're not going to be able to tell the difference.
Ellie,
That's the thing with the steam locomotives. American steam locomotives
in the
for
international
scale wheels.
Yeah, same thing. You're looking at that, and that's the same thing in the international scale. It looks prototype, but then they put a smaller truck, smaller wheelbase on it, and it doesn't look right. The car body and everything looks great, but the wheelbase is different. So yeah, it scales up. Because when you said that about the bogies, the trucks, but
that terminology again?
Yeah, because I saw one for sale here a while back, and man, the car body looked awesome, but they had these little tiny trucks on it, and it just didn't look right. And so yeah, it scales down, or scales up, I guess. But anyway,
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I was just looking through the chat. Michael McCarver. Sorry, I'm probably going to butcher your name, Michael. Actually, no, probably not. Michael McCarville or McCarville.
Michael McCarville.
There you go. He's just said, guys, also some people focus on operations and not details on motive power. Operations oriented people focus on reliability and the ability to perform in an operation session. And with that point that Michael's put there, that can also be considered prototypical. You might not want the locos to look prototype. You don't want the layout to look prototype, but the way you want it to operate, you want the operations to be prototypical. You want everything to have a job. You want the trains to be making up consists, having arrival departure tracks, having staging, you name it, and like I said, that's one thing I completely forgot to even think about during this conversation, is the operations. And, I can think of plenty of people where, they're not even running a loco. It's just basically a chassis with wheels, but they're running operations. They're shunting, rolling stock backwards and forwards with this, I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And Steve was running, he did a video yesterday where he just showed his trains running, and he had med-train helpers. Steve explained why, and why the prototype would have done the same thing.
Well, because you can't, even on a model railroad, the train gets too long. The curves are tighter, and, they string line. You get enough cars on it, they pull off on the inside. So you got to space your locomotives out, proportionally to the weight of the train. So lately, my thing has been, how long can I run it? And actually, this one crashed because I was putting another one on the rear end. But yeah, if you put it all on the head end, it's gonna pull over. So you space it out, and the prototypes would put it about a third. From the head end, they would put the helpers about a third of the train. So if you had a 100-car train, you're going up a whatever grade, 33, 35 cars back, you'd have the helpers. And sometimes they put them on the rear. But yeah, that's kind of what I've done, is just try to figure out how much I can run before it crashes. And it crashes all the time.
But you've also got that issue with, when it comes to DPU, of weight. Obviously, you're going to put your heavier cars at the front and your lighter cars at the back. Otherwise, your heavy cars at the back, you're going to have that same issue. They're going to want to pull off the curve.
Well, we had the same problem with, the 1-to-1 scale. If you've got a lot of empties on the head end of a train, they don't like that if the weight's on the back end. So they would always try to set up the trains where you had the loads on the head end and most of the empties on the rear. When I was running, we never did DPUs. I did the remote control equipment on the simulator back in the early 80s. but I never actually ran them. I ran some long trains with loads on the rear end and empties on the head end, and that was not fun because that was back when they were starting to want to use dynamic braking to slow the trains down. So as soon as you shut the power off on the head end, those loads on the back end would come in and just hit you and push you. So, going up grades, that's what they would try to do, is keep the loads on the head end, put the helpers, probably, a third of the way back, and then put most of the empties on the rear. And the funny thing is in modeling, even in N scale, it's very similar. If you've got a bunch of loads on the rear end, and it streamlines. So there's a lot of parallels to modeling our railroads in real life. It's like, how big can you get it before it doesn't work, and where can you put the power in to make it work? So get as big a train as you can go with what you have, and until it fails. And that's what I've been doing. I've been trying to do that. It's kind of fun.
It's an interesting thing that you bring up there about having limits on your model railway, because we were talking about that a couple of weeks back, weren't we, Claude? About knowing your equipment and knowing your limits. I mean, yes, it's still a model railroad, but you still got certain rules that you have to obey.
Or it won't work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the problem with mine is it's all DC, and I've got a lot of stuff, but they don't run together. You can't speed match DC, and these are all old stuff. So you try to find stuff that runs sort of close together, and you put it on the head end and hope that it works on the back end. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Otherwise, you get the concertina effect.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the limit I had was, I think it was 83 cars. I think that was the most I ever got running, because you get with these old Atlas couplers, you've got springs in them, and you multiply that by 80 cars, and you've got this going. And it's the same way with the prototype. If you have got a 100-car train, you're going to have at least one car that's slack on that train, just from the drawbars and the couplers, and probably more like 2 cars. So if we had a caboose on the end, which they put them in, they got rid of them in the mid 80s. But if you had a run in on that, from the head end, and the crew was on the caboose, all of a sudden 2 cars of slack runs in, and these guys are trashed. So it's the same way with the real life, because the slack gets to be the point where they've got to put mid-train helpers in it, or now it's DPUs. And that's another subject, because they're cutting costs on trains. You're getting 15,000-foot trains now with DPUs on the head end, middle, and on the rear. And that's all because of PSR, precision scheduled railroading. So that's another subject I'll get on later.
In the late 90s, here in Western Australia, West Rail trialled a new system. This was before DPU was introduced, called Locotrol, and it was basically remote control of a second locomotive. And what they would do, they would a consist with your loco and driver at the front end, and at the back end you'd have your remote control locomotive.
Yeah.
And so the driver at the front end is driving both locomotives. And the reason why that never carried on after the trials, I think they only ran it for something like 2 or 3 years, and then of course West Rail got sold in the early 2000s, was the fact that they had that concertina issue, especially when they were empty wagons. As soon as you empty the wagon, they're lighter, and they've got nothing in them. There's no weight
Well-
to them. So of course they're gonna compact.
Exactly. We called it local control, but they called it RCE on Santa Fe. But yeah, it was the same thing. It was very unreliable at best.
Primitive.
And you had the engineer on the front of the train controlling the remote consoles on the control stand. And back then it was all analog. And if you had a mountainous territory and tunnels, the remote equipment would stay in whatever mode it was when it lost continuity. So if the thing is shoving uphill and you're going downhill on the head end and you lose continuity, that thing's going to keep running in run 8 until it goes over the top and gets continuity with the head end. And it was okay. It wasn't great. But now with the technology with the DPUs, that's different. I think it's all working on satellites now. So the continuity is fine and it works great. But boy, back with the remote control equipment when I was doing it, no, it was not a good thing.
Yeah. Anyway, besides that, surprisingly, it's the end of the show. It's actually been an hour already.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that actually flew. Now, I'm going to take these last couple of minutes to talk about a few things. Now, traveling boxcars are en route to their first locations. The Great Postal Service is taking their sweet ass time, but that's expected considering the showstopper. What else?
Prizes.
Yep.
You needed emails.
Yeah. I am waiting on an email from, I can't remember who. Claude knows who it is.
Chris Birchfield for the HO and Justin Johnson for the N scale.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So if you're listening, guys, or watching the replay, get us an email.
Yep. So get us an email, so then that way we can actually post those prizes, because I don't have any addresses to post those prizes to. We do have a plan for another giveaway, which we will talk in a bit more detail next week. Which will be exciting. In saying that as well, tying into today's subject with prototype versus freelance, next week we'll be talking about weathering locomotives and rolling stock and other bits and pieces, and with that, I will be weathering a loco live on the show. So I do have a couple of options. I've got an AC-12, I've got a big boy. I don't remember if I have any challenges left to weather. What else do I have? I've got a couple of diesels, got a couple of E units I need to weather, a couple of switching units. I guess the main thing I'm trying to say is leave a comment below this video. Let me know, just ask, do you have this model? Can you please weather this? Or do you have this model? Can you please weather that? So then that way, whatever gets the most votes or is most requested, I'll try and weather that next week. Is there anything?
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe. Is anything else?
Hit the thumbs up.
Yeah, is there anything else, Claude, you want to add?
No, not that I know of. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah. Today was a great subject. We might touch on this later on in another live stream. Maybe we might separate a little bit, go into a little bit more detail. Not sure really. Maybe we'll talk about it more on trackside beams, which we should be doing hopefully next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know Steve's been looking forward to it because he just keeps going on and on and on and saying, "Oh, I miss beans. I miss beans."
I do. I miss beans.
Apart from that, as Claude said, thanks again everyone for coming by. Thanks the chat. hopefully you guys actually enjoyed this video. As you know, we enjoyed it. The hour went by pretty quickly. And yeah, again, leave us any comments. Let us know if there's anything you want us to talk about. And I guess we'll see you guys next week. Thanks again. Peace.
Thank you. Peace.
Bye.
Now I've got to try and find the screen.